Hey, this is Gavin Palmer with Hero Looking for Group. Coming into the closet. Not coming out of the closet, coming into the closet. Um, Randos on the rise and fall of Mars Hill, evangelical civil war, gossip, worship, sex plus Protestants. So I really liked how Paul created notes and then used those. And I think many people have used this technique, so I just posted my notes. I've got other questions and comments down here, but the thing that is most interesting to me out of this entire list, well, actually, it would be patterns. There, I am an I like abstractions. I like systems. I like complexity. I like thinking about the future and trying to predict the future based on patterns. And so I'm also interested in technology and the role technology plays in the transformation of organizations of people. And so this last part, I think, was the most important, most interesting with regard to this. And specifically, there was mention of changes in the culture and technology, and there was mention of birth control. So the idea that I wanted to talk about, let's see, let's just let's let Paul state a question.
Have this conversation, not talk about the sex stuff a little bit, because you were saying he was teaching kind of orthodox sexual ethics, and I think there are some many interesting ways in which I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, what I meant was like mainly on like the LGBT, right. Yeah, not on the like sex positivity like stuff. And I think that it's interesting. I agree with that. That was, but again, that was a way to stand out, right? Be explicit, say it from the pulpit.
Because this is a weird thing, because he's like kind of reactionary trad in some ways, right? Like the way to stand out in Seattle is to like emphasize big families and stuff like that. That was very countercultural. But then the really strong emphasis on sex and marriage should be really great is not very traditionally Christian emphasis, to say the least. And he talked explicitly from the pulpit about these things in a way that I think he is the most extreme example of that I know of by far.
I mean, John MacArthur wrote a review of his Song of Solomon series, and he titled the article "The Rape of Solomon's Song" because of how critical he was about how explicit Mark was being in the pulpit about these things. I'm very, very critical.
I mean, but now this is again one of these like similar. How are you going to be edgy and stand?
Maybe my internet is going too slow to handle the speed.
And stand out in a place like Seattle where everyone expects you to be sex negative. Well, be sex positive, and suddenly a sex positive church.
How much of the criticism is just because these other guys just can't have as good sex because they're beta males?
So that's a good one. Yeah, sex positive church. There's this transformation that happens. So in general, there's these transformations like centralizations of power. There's these kinds of civil war patterns where there's decentralization of power. Basically, people end up with new ideas because of the environment. The environment changes, people end up with new ideas. I don't actually think people come up with ideas. I think they receive the ideas based on the time and place. You could say they receive them from a spiritual power. And then you end up with kind of this entrepreneurship pattern. There's people that are experimenting and testing. And so the thing that's different between entrepreneurs and businesses versus churches is that the entrepreneurs are not thinking in terms of, they tend not to think in terms of 1,000 years, whereas the churches should be thinking in terms of millennia and thousands of years. So there's a difference in terms of this pattern, priorities in time pattern regarding immediate gratification. So how far into the future are you looking? And so they're talking about Mars Hill, and there's this pattern of this kind of entrepreneurship, immediate gratification pattern that's short-sighted. And so this short-sightedness is a trap that you don't want to get into if you are aiming at something that's really good. And for me, when you're aiming at something really good, you're aiming at something that is infinite as far as how far out into the future it is looking, and infinite in terms of how many people it is trying to account for. So you have to be careful when you start breaking hierarchy. There's a threat that tyranny can come in and replace it. I think that was worth mentioning. There was this talk about gossip and the tendency for people to regulate speech. And that leads to, I'm going to say this in a specific way, ignorance. For me, sin is connected to ignorance, and you can't have growth, the spiritual growth, as was discussed in the video, unless you are giving your attention to the information that allows for transformation within your life, such that the church's ability to reach the big goal, the infinite goal, is improved. Our ability to reach that goal is improved. So if that big goal was something like peace on earth, the distance in time and space, it gets closer, right? So as we as individuals transform, peace on earth gets closer. And the technology is having an impact as well. There's this cognitive load pattern called Dunbar's number. I just wanted to mention lawsofux.com. I think Paul and anyone interested in the limitations of the brain would be interested in lawsofux.com. I don't necessarily think that, I don't agree with an idea that we should be catering toward people's ignorance so that we can make things as easy as possible. I think there are times to do that, like the way you would treat a child, and then there are stages of development such that our ability to handle a cognitive load changes as we transform, as we learn how to use processes and technology. So one piece of technology that you may be aware of is the hive mind. And the hive mind, we should account for things like cognitive load problems, and the ability of the human mind to handle information, right? And so our technology and our process should update such that we are not overwhelming the brain. We don't want to overwhelm the hive mind, and we don't want to overwhelm any individuals. Failure porn pattern, attractiveness and power. So porn is this thing that kind of pulls you into a state of mind where you might forget about the infinite goal. And there's specifically failure porn. People like the stories of failure, and I think if you don't take the story of failure or the gossip and allow it to transform you and your group, then it is useless. It is a non-productive and sometimes counterproductive activity. It is a waste of your attention. So be careful. The hive mind, the idea of the hive mind is to facilitate the communication of gossip and the communication of failure, and ultimately transformation in order to reach good goals. That's about it. I'll leave you with some prophecy. So the church is usually referred to as a place for, I would say church and religion I see it as a place for people who are fallen. They are sick. They are like children, and they have a lot to learn, and it's necessary. So whenever you create a lot of these rules, they are meant for people who are going through their first steps in their development. And so that's good. People have to take first steps. But what does the church look like in the future after many people have taken steps and developed? And I would suggest things like people would go to church and they would be naked. They would be nude. So when you are naked and in the nude, there is transparency. And if you, in your mind, don't have self-control, the men, for example, would start getting erections. And if men start getting erections, it is a tell. It begins, it's a tell for how much you have developed in your spiritual battle, your personal spiritual battle. And so one of my predictions would be that in the future there will be churches, and we already have them, but the church, like ultimately, these guys are talking about something like sex positivity. Well, the ultimate transformation is people going to a church and remaining holy even though they're naked. And I think this transparency and nudity is like the culmination of a spiritual development and a winning of a spiritual war for individuals who are able to work together. So that is a prophecy, and I know that most people will not like it. And I could talk about other ones as well. And the hive mind is an example where if you and your church use the hive mind, you would allow for the gossip to surface in such a way that there can be the transformation and the learning, while avoiding the reasons why people don't actually say the thing they would say to the person that they want to, that they're talking about. So it would be nice if gossip was facilitated in such a way that it was respectful and transformative. And the same thing about failures. So I predict that hive mind technology will, and it doesn't have to use software, it could be a suggestion box where people type up and print the thing. But it would have to be done in a way such that it provides anonymity, for example, in that implementation of a hive mind. Another thing to think about is Pastor Paul a megachurch? Are we participating in a megachurch? And I'm having these ideas and I've had these ideas before about content. So our attention is the most valuable resource in the world, and we can control the content that we consume if we have control and have developed spiritually. And as a good parent, we would do the same when deciding what kind of content to give our children. This is why some people would prefer to homeschool, because we don't trust the system, because we don't trust the system to be able to do that properly. And so a church is a place, right now that there's a brick and mortar church where you go and consume content. And you can do other things like fellowship, and you can do charity, and you can do work. You can also sing and dance. And so the content that is in this, you can call it an event, it can be done in new ways. There's nothing stopping you and people like you from hosting an event where you stream Pastor Paul's event. It's a live stream. And so churches in general can do this, and you are no longer restricted by your ability to travel to that church. And you can do it in such a way that it is inviting for your community to participate. And what will happen is that the best events will grow in popularity. And these will be the ones with the best music and the best training and teaching for people to dance in transformative ways, to sing and dance in transformative ways, such that when you sing, you are breathing the correct way, such that your mind, your body will heal. And the messages. So Pastor Paul could put a speaker at his church that's broadcasting the content, and I don't know what it would be. It could be reading of the Bible, it could be the reading of 12 Rules for Life, or it could be the streaming of the Paul VanderKlay YouTube channel. So these are some ideas about how the transformation, it's about related to the transformation process. And it's an attempt to share the ideas of the times that are connected to the Holy Spirit, such that transformation can happen. And we need to avoid the risks. We have to talk about the risks. You don't want to break the hierarchy and have a tyranny emerge in its place. And the hive mind could allow for a hive mind done properly can allow for the breakdown of a hierarchy, such that the tyranny cannot emerge in its place. All right. I thank you for your time and attention. Your attention is the most valuable resource in the world. If you're interested in the hive mind, and if you're a software engineer or someone interested in information technology, connect with me, because that's what I do. I'm an expert. I'm a professional in the area of information technology. in general, and then I have I am a subject matter expert on some things specifically. So I appreciate your time and attention. Reach out if you want to. I invite you to reach out to me if you have a similar area of interest as I do. Thanks.